Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our analysis of the EU-India talks in Delhi today. It was a historic occasion with President von der Leyen and the entire College of Commissioners landing in Delhi for strategic conversations. The EU finds itself in a Trump tariff equation, and it finds itself a little bit on a back foot with the new White House. So despite this event having been planned way in advance for the EU, it is at a make or break time in international relations. Today we have a group of young, committed EU-India practitioners who will analyze, hot off the press reactions to the von der Leyen Modi meetings in Delhi. Let me start with Dr. Swasti Rao from Jindal Global University, who's also an analyst and one of the most respected names on the Indian side on EU-India relations. Welcome, Swasti, and if we could have your initial comments on this visit of von der Leyen to India.
Well, thank you so much, Vas, and it's a pleasure to join all of you today. Yes, I have not only been today in Delhi while Ursula von der Leyen was actually giving her remarks on one of the events that was for the larger strategic community, because the rest of the remarks we have only seen on TV, the ones that she's had with the Prime Minister. But she did hold one event for the larger strategic community. I was very much there in the morning, and I will certainly share that with you. But just to sort of add a little bit at the outset is that I yesterday came back from Ukraine. So I have a very good idea, and Ursula von der Leyen was there as well, along with the 21 commissioners. So I have a good idea of how European Union is trying to sort of reach out to Indo-Pacific and India. So very quickly, because it's the first set of remarks, my key takeaway would be 3-4 things. I think one, that it was very pleasing to see that, of course, she mentioned the FTA, and she mentioned that there are problems in the FTA, referring to the CBAM, of course, and I'm not coming to that first. But I think what pleased me was the fact that she mentioned that the European Union is looking at as security and defense cooperation and security partnership with India. And when she said the security and defense partnership, it was more like a proposal. But I could definitely see that she is referring to hybrid threats like counterterrorism. She's referring to critical infrastructure and its protection. She's referring to those kind of things, which like in our own analysis, we've been arguing that it makes a lot of sense for India to get into these kind of security frameworks, which are by definition non-traditional. So that's the first thing. So I found it very, in many ways, reconfirming that something that I've been proposing for long, because I have been talking about hybrid threat center in the Indo-Pacific, which can be led by EU and India and could focus on the Indian Ocean region, where India is the main player. So I have been writing about it for a long time. So I was very happy to see that she was actually very categorical in stating that. So that's the first key takeaway in my opinion. The other thing is that she constantly referred to AI. And I think that also is a long overdue project, because India and the EU have already signed what is known as the Trade and Technology Council, the TTC. And under the TTC, we have also signed an MOU on semiconductors, but nothing much has happened there. And through my writing, I have argued that for this to fly, we have to steer it at the NSA level. And for those of you who are not familiar, NSA is, we have a national security advisor, and we have certain, critical and emerging technologies partnership, particularly with the US and the French, that are doing very well. Why? Because in my opinion, they're steered at the NSA level. So they become a part of the country's strategic vision. By contrast, this has been lacking in the EU-India space, and I think it's time that it should be steered at the NSA level, because she kept coming back to AI and kept referring to these particular frameworks that are already in place. So this was the second takeaway. The third would be, of course, as Vas said, and I would let him do the talking because it's probably both our favorite topics, but it is about the connectivity and IMEC. She did mention that this is something which is very path-breaking, and she mentioned how this was declared at the G20 summit when India was holding the G20 presidency in 2023. And then she said that, one has to work on that. Vas would know that we are trying to work out different alternative ways in which we can get the IMEC, and especially the European leg of IMEC, working from India's perspective. And there's a plan of trying to develop more strategic gateways into Europe. So she talked about all of that, in passing. And the fourth key takeaway definitely would be about trade. And I did see that towards the end of the day, like now we have so many reports coming from the news agencies that both Prime Minister Modi and Ursula von der Leyen have confirmed. I hope it is so. It happens that they are going to be signing on the FTA towards the end. I mean, before 2025 ends. So I think this is definitely Donald Trump effect talking, because in its current form, it is next to impossible to really sign on the FTA, because there is a lot of disinformation around CBAM in India. So I think these would be my key takeaways. And just my last point would be that I was also pleased to see how realistic she sounded about the fact that Europe has to relook and reimagine its security architecture. And I think there was a lot of earnest communication around that, about what is happening. But that India's official position on the Russia-Ukraine war is that of neutrality. So I honestly don't see much happening there. But I would want this relationship to steer in a way that focuses on converging maximizing the convergences and minimizing the divergences. And the geopolitical moment is just right for that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Swasti. And yes, of course, IMEC is something we need to have a separate session on IMEC, because I was very happy to hear Prime Minister Modi as well as von der Leyen speak very, very convincingly about IMEC happening, despite all that has happened in the past 2 years. I liked what she said during the press conference. For Europe, India is a pillar of security in an increasingly uncertain world. Tiziano, your reactions.
Yeah, let me say, first of all, thank you for the invitation. So I agree, I strongly agree with what Swasti just said. Probably the most relevant point was this partnership on security and defense. And why I say this? Because so now it's almost like 20 years, 2 decades, no, if I'm not wrong, that India and the EU signed the strategic partnership, which was not implemented, we can say, for many years. And the main problems were, like, I can say, related to geopolitics or strategy, if you like. So essentially, these relations was based on trade, development aid, and on the economic side of the story, I would say. So I'm really glad to hear from the President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, that now we can go beyond economic and trade, and also talk about strategy, and talk about alignment, political alignment. And we can also talk about security threats. We can talk about more strategic things, because one of the main problem of the strategic partnership, which is not, this is something that we don't talk about it usually, but I take the chance to say, it's like that usually we sign strategic partnerships with countries with which we don't really share long-term goals. So that's why also we didn't implement. And also, I would say that the European Union, for many years, when we looked at the Indo-Pacific from the European Union, when we look at the Indo-Pacific region, we just somehow, we were able just to see China as an opportunity, the Chinese market. So I'm glad really that we can witness this, that we are seeing like somehow a shift. I agree with you also that you mentioned that this was an historic trip. I strongly believe that it was an historic trip. Now I'm going to conclude. I just say that I'm about to write an article about the Trump effect on the Indo-Pacific strategy for Europe, and I'm really and I'm convinced, and I believe that probably what will not change somehow it's the position and the posture towards India. I'm also like really glad that finally the European Union followed what the single member states, and I'm talking about France, I'm talking about Italy, I'm talking about Germany, which published like a focus on India a few months ago, are already doing on a bilateral level. So we can really like be positive and optimistic.
Thank you so much, Tiziano. Two questions, Marc, specifically from the French perspective. Does this mean a reset of the EU relationship with China, given the new love found between the EU and India for the Indo-Pacific, for connectivity, etc.? And from the French perspective, given that we are, I think, too many Italians in the room, so from the French perspective, how would you see this trip to India?
Thank you very much, Vas. Thank you for your invitation to share my views on this historical visit. Indeed, even because I believe it's quite striking that almost the whole Commission traveled to India. I think it's the first time it happened, which is a very strong signal in this geopolitical context. On your first question, you said the reset of the strategic relationship with China, or
Does this mean a reset of the relationship with China, according to you?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure. I think the EU and every geopolitical actors at the moment are trying to diversify their partnerships worldwide. They try to find a balance between different actors. The fact that the US is now moving towards Russia again is, of course, a big game regambling. And so, of course, everyone's trying, I think at the moment is looking at one another to understand what will the other do in a nutshell. And when it comes to India and the EU, it's quite an obvious move to do to get closer together. I'm quite optimistic, but not too much, Nels, in the sense that indeed in 2004 there was this strategic partnership already that was struck, but it in the end it didn't work from 2013 because of the trade negotiations, especially around agriculture, which plays still a very big part of the Indian economy. And since then it's been blocked, and it was relaunched in 2022 by Ursula von der Leyen traveling to India, and they launched this second, the second tech and trade council after the US, with India, and it didn't create much result neither. So I think we should be a little bit cautious. Of course, there's a room for improvement, especially in the space of automotive and the access to the Indian market for the EU, which is under threat when it comes to the US. And so here, but India will probably ask for a better market access to the EU, especially in agriculture. And I think there is a momentum because obviously with right-wing parties in Europe insisting on productivity and sovereignty in agriculture, they will ease a little bit the burden of environmental constraints, which could be a moment of an agreement. Of course, when it comes to agriculture, we see that the past wasn't very till now, it hasn't been very fruitful, the negotiation. So I guess moving to AI could be a way for better alignment and probably a future agreement. So when it comes to China, I think, of course, China is looking at all this with great care, but I'm not sure that for the EU it means we're going to switch from China to India. I think it's more a question of diversification and investing in an economy, in a political actor that could be probably more reliable in the mid-long term than China if the geopolitical situation was to get worse, especially with the US. When it comes to France, I think that the EU indeed is somehow following the path of the French presidency when it comes to engaging with India. Modi traveled to France, I think, 6 times since he was elected first in 2014. He's been invited at the 14th of July military parade. There's been already a lot of military agreement. India has I guess, started to really diversify their military partnership, which was exclusively Russian, obviously for many, many years, with the US, but also with France. Macron anticipated this switch to AI, from agriculture to AI, by inviting President Modi to Paris for the AI Action Summit, and India will chair the next AI Action Summit. So I think there's here an interesting strategic partnership that is already struck, and obviously many European actors are trying to follow this path. And I guess here it might be quite a tough part for Ursula von der Leyen, because European actors are competing when it comes to India. We can see that when speaking about IMEC and what would be the terminal in Europe between Marseille, where Modi traveled last 2 weeks ago when he was in Paris. He also went to Marseille, which could be the end point of the IMEC corridor, but obviously competing with touch points in Italy, with Genova or Trieste, which might be more suitable also for Germany. So I think here the EU Commission also has some kind of challenge of bringing together the European to have a consistent and coherent strategy when it comes to engaging with India. And of course, France can be sometimes a little bit difficult to handle from that point of view.
Thanks so much, Marc, and thank you for mentioning that Trieste is definitely a better option than Marseille. Emanuele, Indo-Mediterranean and supply chain resilience. Any takeaways from you?
Yes, thank you, Vas. Thank you for inviting me. I'm glad to be here with you. And yes, I think that Ursula von der Leyen said today something about, let me check, for Europe, India is a pillar of security in an increasingly uncertain world. And that's it. I think that India is crucial for EU strategy and much more for Indo-Mediterranean strategy, but also EU is crucial for India in the Mediterranean strategy. Without the role that European assets playing in the Indo-Mediterranean, for example, on the Red Sea and Arabic Sea, and obviously on the western part of Indian Ocean, India is not under a security environment. And this is and I think is the main topic for the supply chain resilience and the risking, the coupling in some way, and the Europe-Asia, Europe-India connection. And I think Italy will be part of this project, but much more European Union will be part of this project, and is under India interest to be linked with the EU right now. I think that in this moment, India and European Union are watching the world with the same eyes, under the topics of democracy or something much more pragmatic. There is to manage the Trump administration effect in EU, but also in India and in the Pacific, as Tiziano said before me. And there is another issue to manage, the China in Indian Ocean, but also in the Mediterranean, and there are an intertangled issue. So I think I agree with Marc for the part of concern of this kind of relation and the implementation, the improvement of this relation. But I think that this moment, the geopolitical environment, the geopolitical landscape is changing in a very quickly way. And so for India and for EU, it's better to link their destinies.
That's a very nice way of putting it, Emanuele. Trump and tariffs. Also, von der Leyen said in her speech that we are two of the largest democracies in the world, and she said something about autocracies, taking advantage, which was an obvious barb to Russia during her speech. At least that's how I saw it. Swasti, that you have these Indian sensitivities sitting in Delhi, so. Two questions. Number one is, despite the very strong relationship between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump, does India feel on edge in a Trump White House? And number two, according to you, how much of the EU's push towards India comes with strings attached vis-a-vis Russia? And how much does India expect EU to decouple from China? So these two very separate questions, but I'd appreciate if you could address them.
The first question on, India, the US, and does India feel unease about Donald Trump's behaviors and, his ways, his modus operandi? Of course, India feels very uncomfortable. And, for India, the US is a very important partner, not only because of the massive trade we have in goods and services, which is close to $190 billion, but as also, I think Marc was the one who said that India has been trying very hard to diversify away from Russian arms. Okay. And our dependence on Russian arms was massive. So in this bid for diversification, we are looking at three major partners. France, of course, is a historic partner. I cannot overstate the importance of France when it comes to India's strategic interests and military interests. But not just France, it's also the US. In fact, if you look at the last 10 years data, the US's share has seen a meteoric rise in India's defense imports, and co-production and all of that. So US is very important there. US is also extremely important for our diaspora, which is about, millions of 5 million, strong diaspora. We also earn a lot of remittances from the US. And for us, US is a kind of a counterbalancing against China, because China talks about a multipolar world, but a unipolar Asia, which can never reconcile with India's push for a multipolar world and a multipolar Asia. So these are the reasons that make US very important. But with Donald Trump coming back, frankly, it has been difficult. Donald Trump has called India a tariff abuser. India has already, even before the Prime Minister went to the White House, the finance minister had presented a budget. In the budget, she had already cut down tariffs on range of things, especially the Harley Davidson motorbikes, etc. But more than that, we had agreed to buy more hydrocarbons. In the first Donald Trump administration, we had bought about $7 billion worth of hydrocarbons, and this is one of the ways in which we can reduce the trade surplus that we enjoy with vis-a-vis the US. And this perhaps for Donald Trump is the centerpiece, of his foreign policy. So he looks at the entire world with the lens of tariffs and trade deficits. And India, of course, enjoys about $46 billion worth of trade surplus with the US. So the only way we can reduce the trade surplus is we start, of course, buying more hydrocarbons that we already agreed to. Second, we buy more military equipment that we have again agreed to. I mean, currently, I don't know how many of you are aware that India is trying to embark upon its fighter jet program. There are different levels to that program, but one of the initial, ones are already over, but now the other ones are now we are up to. And for that, the engines we are dependent on the US, the GE-404 and the GE-414. And similarly for the armored infantry vehicles and the javelins, the Predator drones. I mean, it's a pretty long list, frankly. So America is important, but India finds it difficult to be predictable, in its equation with America because of Donald Trump's constant flippy-floppy style of diplomacy. But at the same time, I have argued through my pieces that despite all these hiccups, the long-term convergence on Indo-Pacific, the long-term convergence on China, the long-term convergence on defense industry cooperation, all of that is going to continue. I think Donald Trump, we have to take him seriously, but not literally. It has been my argument because we have to wait and watch. I think he is also in a hurry to show something back to the MAGA fan base that he can deliver. And I think that's the reason for his strategic cacophony. But it does make India nervous, that there's no doubt about it. And in fact, Vas, you would be aware that there's Professor C. Raja Mohan, who's also another very well-known Indian strategic commentator, who has argued that it is because of Donald Trump in the White House that also creates, an extra leverage for India and the EU to come together. Not because EU is perceived, and here I want to now come to the second part of your question, not that EU is perceived as a major strategic player. In the eyes of India, EU has never, the European Union has never truly been able to capture India's strategic imagination, because there are member states. France, for example, is the perhaps one prime example of who is the closest strategic partner that we have in Europe. There's also UK. We have a very strong defense industry cooperation with the UK. We have a 2+2 dialogue. We are also negotiating an FTA with the UK. So yeah, but UK is outside of the EU gambit. Coming back to the EU, there are individual member states with whom we have excellent ties. We have a lot of conversations on semiconductors, for example, with the Dutch, and so on and so forth. With France, I've already told you. With Italy, now we are trying to revamp our ties. But the EU bloc has not been able to capture India's strategic imagination. And the reasons are also very obvious, because it is not envisioned as a strategic player. And now, frankly, India is also seeing how Donald Trump is pushing the Europeans to take care of their own security and do more for Ukraine. Because if the bloc is able to rise up to the challenge, which is right there in their neighborhood, perhaps it will also qualify them to be taken more seriously here in New Delhi. So, because for all practical purposes, I have said that many a times, that politically, yes, we try to shy away from taking a clear view against Russia. But for all practical purposes, whether it's investment, remittances, defense industry, technological innovation, trade, whatever you pick up, we've already pivoted away to the West. So I think because of that, it is the right time. I would even set, despite me saying that, I would also be a little I'm sorry about the plane. It's a bit of a disturbance. Yeah, but having said that, I would be a little conservative, because if I pick up the history of India-EU relations, we have focused more on outputs, an output here, an output there, an output here, and there are many mechanisms in place. But frankly, we have not been able to lead to meaningful outcomes. Okay. And I think this particular dynamic should change now that the entire college of 21 commissioners were in India, along with the top brass. It is a strategic posturing, and it is a signaling, of course. But end of the day, the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating, and one has to be conservative. If you ask me, I would prioritize. I would say, okay, let's get starting. I don't see the FTA happening. I think the FTA is far more complicated. The EU's lot of policies are looked upon as very predatory, which are sometimes not true, because there is a lot of disinformation. I've worked a lot on CBAM, and I know that CBAM is something that India will eventually not able to avoid, because whether we sign an FTA or not, the CBAM is going to apply from 1st January 2026. In fact, if you were to sign for an FTA, you would allow for more climate financing, So I have argued on those lines, but frankly, I find it very difficult to see how the FTA is going to come through in its present form. On the contrary, I would perhaps put more premium on maritime security initiatives, which work very well, which are very mature. And I would, talk more about, for example, connectivity that I've been doing, because that is something which is in a clear win-win. India's exports to Europe are routed through Rotterdam and Hamburg. There is a saturation. We need more strategic gateways. Prime Minister has shown it very clearly. He went to Marseille. He talked about which was Mumbai-Marseille connectivity. In my article and column, I've written about MMTP, which is Mumbai-Marseille, Trieste and Thessaloniki, and eventually connecting it to 3Cs. So I think those are things which are right there. Maritime security, hybrid threats, and connectivity would be my focus areas. Frankly, I don't see the FTA really working, especially because we have a very difficult minister here by the name of Mr. Piyush Goyal, and he has been very, stringent on certain things. So unless there is a PMO stepping in out there, I frankly don't see the FTA happening.
Thank you so much, Swasti. So that's all that we had the time for today. Any last comments before we conclude? Perfect.
If I may,
I really agree with Sorry,
Tiziano.
I really agree with Svasti, because I think that the FTA is a second part of this kind of relation. The security and the other issue on the table are a priority in this moment, and the FTA is a little bit complex.
Tiziano, you were saying something?
Yes, thank you. Just to say, I noticed that seems like I'm the most optimistic in this in this panel. I just wanted to say why, because like for me, compared to the past, the situation has changed, meaning that like the Europe is somehow obliged to take a position. We cannot look at regions just looking at the opportunities. I mean, now we are somehow obliged, and this is something that started a long time ago. Von der Leyen already proposed this idea of a geopolitical commission. So things are changing since like already like 2020 and even before. So that's why I'm more optimistic. And also, just to add something, I want to say that in the relationship between the European Union and China, something is already happening. I mean, in terms, for instance, of foreign direct investments. But not just this. I mean, all the regulation of the European Union towards China in the last year was like aimed to somehow not de-risking, decoupling also a bit like the two economies. So that's why I say I'm a bit optimistic, and I really just say that without the FTA, we can talk about connectivity, but without the FTA, it's going to be difficult to think about what to put on the boats, on the ships.
And that's why I agree with Tiziano. I'm a little actually I share Swasti's cynicism on the FTA also because it is the same players on both sides, and if the past years have not led to a breakthrough, it's only going to happen because of a perceived threat from the Trump White House, which is never a good reason why to do a deal. And I see that more from the EU's end rather than India's end, because India has had a certain amount of openness. The resistance and the frustration has been dealing with 27 capitals and 28 capitals and 28 different sets of bureaucracy, even when it's come to Minister Jaishankar. That said, however, I believe that IMEC is going to be the reason why the FTA is going to happen in some form, maybe not in its current form, but maybe in a much more diluted form, because if you're going to make a trade route, you're going to have something to put on the ships, and you're going to have to make that work. So I do believe that for IMEC, and only for IMEC, this miracle of this EU FTA is going to happen, and also to a certain extent because TEPA has already happened, and it is already in effect since the 1st of January, and that is threat enough for example, for Italy, where you have Switzerland making equipment next door, and Italy here and Swiss equipment will now be cheaper probably than Chinese equipment in India because of the duties. So there are various combinations, and the threat of the Trump tariffs, which I like the alliteration for obvious reasons, I think is a good enough threat. The reason why I have cynicism is because I do not think that von der Leyen has the personal commitment to all of this. I think it's more reactive. So while I have extreme amounts of faith in Prime Minister Modi, I do not have that kind of confidence. But then again, everybody can surprise us politically when the gun is towards their head. So that said, on a very cautious note, I thank you all for spending this time on a Friday afternoon, Friday evening for Swasti, discussing hot off the press. It'll be day after. We'll publish this online tomorrow, and we'll send you all the links so that you can actually send it across. The day after analysis of von der Leyen's visit to India. For IMEC, we hope this FTA holds through. And of course, Europe and India have a long history with different phases to it. And the rush to India has always been Europe's dream. And hopefully we'll have both these economies and the world's largest democracies work closer together to create one Indo-Mediterranean. So thank you again for participating, and have a great evening. Thanks.
That's